Spock's two Star Trek heartbreaks explain why the Vulcan never pursued love again. For all his legendary wisdom and stoic Vulcan restraint, Mr. Spock of Star Trek carried deep wounds that rarely surfaced in his conversations with Captain Kirk or Dr. McCoy. The half-human, half-Vulcan science officer often appeared as if he had transcended personal entanglements, pursuing logic, duty, and scientific truth above all else. Yet beneath that cool exterior, Spock's life was shaped by a handful of painful encounters with love. His two most defining heartbreaks not only scarred him but also explained why, after those moments, Spock never again pursued romance with the same vulnerability. To understand Spock's complex relationship with love, one has to revisit both the original series and the wider canon that followed. Spock's dual nature made love especially dangerous. Before diving into his heartbreaks, it's important to understand why love was such a precarious subject for Spock in the first place. As the son of the Vulcan ambassador Sarek and the human Amanda Grayson, Spock lived his life at the intersection of logic and emotion. Vulcans suppressed their passions because their natural intensity could be destructive if unrestrained. Spock's human half, however, made him feel emotions more deeply than many full Vulcans might ever admit. Love, for Spock, was never going to be casual. If he allowed himself to be vulnerable, the cost was always enormous. His dedication to Starfleet and his need to prove himself worthy in both Vulcan and human eyes meant that attachments could be liabilities. Even so, two women managed to pierce Spock's defenses, and in both cases, their absence left permanent scars. Heartbreak #1: T'Pring's rejection in Amok Time. One of the most iconic episodes of Star Trek, the original series was Season 2's Amok Time. In it, Spock faces the ancient Vulcan biological imperative known as Pon farr. Every 7 years, Vulcans must either mate or die from the overwhelming flood of repressed emotions. For Spock, this meant traveling to Vulcan to honor his betrothal to T'Pring, a woman he had been bonded with since childhood. At first glance, this should have been the ultimate reconciliation of his human and Vulcan halves, fulfilling a cultural duty while finding companionship. But instead, it became one of Spock's most humiliating and devastating experiences. The duel that broke him. When T'Pring exercised her right to challenge the marriage, she demanded a ritual combat known as Kal If. To Spock's shock, she chose Captain Kirk as her champion, forcing Spock into a duel to the death with his closest friend. The psychological cruelty of the moment cannot be understated. Spock's love life had not only betrayed him but threatened his bond with Kirk, the one person who understood and respected him above all others. The fight ended with Kirk's apparent death, though later revealed to be staged by Dr. McCoy. Spock, believing he had killed his captain and friend, was broken. Only after the deception was revealed did Spock feel the rare joy of embracing Kirk, his emotions spilling out in a way he had long denied. T'Pring's cold logic. What made the heartbreak deeper was the reasoning behind T'Pring's rejection. She admitted that she never truly loved Spock. By invoking the duel, she ensured that whether Kirk won or Spock did, she would be free to pursue another mate of her choice. It was logical, but also cruel. To Spock, this revealed how even Vulcan discipline could disguise selfishness. For Spock, the betrayal by T'Pring wasn't just about lost love. It was a reminder that his human desires for companionship were always at risk of clashing with Vulcan tradition and expectations. His attempt to reconcile both halves of his heritage ended in humiliation, manipulation, and heartbreak. Heartbreak #2: Zarabeth in All Our Yesterdays. If T'Pring represented a logical betrayal, Zarabeth embodied what could have been. In the original series episode, All Our Yesterdays, Spock and Dr. McCoy are stranded in the distant past of the planet Sarpedon, a dying world whose people escaped into history via time portals. There they encounter Zarabeth, an exiled woman condemned to live out her life in an Ice Age wilderness. Unlike T'Pring, Zarabeth was warm, compassionate, and tragically isolated. Her presence awakened something in Spock, something dangerously human. The return of ancient Vulcan passions. Because of the time displacement, Spock's physiology began to revert to the ways of his Vulcan ancestors. Before logic and emotional suppression became cultural law, Vulcans were fierce, primal, and passionate. In Zarabeth's company, Spock became less restrained, more open, and capable of expressing longing. For the first time, he allowed himself to embrace love without shame. He and Zarabeth shared tenderness, and for a fleeting moment, Spock seemed to accept his dual heritage. Here, in the frozen wasteland of a dying world, he could have chosen a life defined not by duty but by personal happiness. A love that couldn't last. But of course, it was not to be. Zarabeth was trapped in her timeline, unable to leave without dying. Spock and McCoy were forced to return to their own era, leaving her alone. The separation was devastating, not just because Spock cared for Zarabeth, but because he had glimpsed a life that was impossible. This heartbreak was quieter than T'Pring's betrayal, but far more haunting. With Zarabeth, Spock had felt love that was genuine, mutual, and transformative. Losing her reinforced the futility of pursuing relationships. For Spock, love became synonymous with impermanence and suffering. Why Spock never pursued love again? These two heartbreaks shaped Spock's choices for the rest of his life. By the time of the later films and Star Trek, The Next Generation, Spock had largely abandoned any pursuit of romance. The lessons he learned from T'Pring and Zarabeth can be distilled into three profound realizations. 1. Duty above desire. In both cases, Spock's obligations to Vulcan tradition with T'Pring and to time itself with Zarabeth interfered with his happiness. Spock concluded that his role as a Starfleet officer and as a bridge between human and Vulcan cultures was too important to risk being compromised by personal attachments. 2. Love meant vulnerability. Vulcan philosophy taught that emotions could overwhelm and destroy. Spock had lived through that firsthand. With T'Pring, his emotional vulnerability was exploited. With Zarabeth, his openness only deepened the pain of inevitable loss. By burying his feelings, Spock could protect himself from further heartbreak. 3. His true bonds were platonic. Though he never found lasting romantic love, Spock's life was not loveless. His deep friendship with Kirk, his camaraderie with McCoy, and his eventual mentoring of protégés like Saavik filled his life with connection. Spock may not have pursued romance, but he chose bonds that were resilient, meaningful, and enduring. Spock's subtle acceptance in later years. By the time of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and his appearances in The Next Generation, Spock was more serene. He no longer seemed haunted by lost loves, but rather at peace with his path. His pursuit of peace between the Federation and the Klingons, and later his work uniting Romulans and Vulcans, suggested that he had sublimated his personal desires into a higher calling. Interestingly, Spock's arc in J.J. Abrams' Kelvin timeline took a different turn. That version of Spock did pursue a relationship with Nyota Uhura. It was a bold departure, perhaps suggesting that without the same sequence of heartbreaks, Spock might have embraced love differently. Yet even in that universe, his commitment to duty often